Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. I am your host, Wendy Nystrom. I have both co-hosts today. I have Joel Vendette and Joy Langford. So thank you guys so much for showing up. And today our special guest is Ben Stapleton. He is the Executive Director for the United States Green Building Council, Los Angeles. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thank you, and good morning. It's good to be here. Appreciate you having me.
So first of all, Ben's a friend of ours. We've known him for ages, so we love having you on. But the work you're doing is very important. So in the simplest way possible, could you please explain what the Green Building Council does?
Absolutely. So you may be familiar with the LEED credential and certification. So we are affiliated with the Green Building Council that runs that on a national basis, but we're an independent nonprofit, independent board, independent financially. And it's simple. We're really focused on leveraging the built environment as an entry point to transform Southern California into a more sustainable region for all. And at the end of the day, we're about people. We can't do that good work without the people who make it happen. So that's really the focus for us here on the communities of Southern California.
You know, you guys have grown so much over even the last 5 years, nationally even. And just to see the work that you guys are doing in Los Angeles has been quite amazing. And I know that the federal government has really, been pushing behind you with all of these net zeros and all of the goals that we do have for, LEED and climate change and what have you. But you guys have really been able to hone in and focus and make sure that things are actually coming to fruition, not just talking about it. So yes. That's one of the things that I've really noticed has been going on with the Green Building Council.
Thank you. That's really, really kind of you to say. And look, one of the reasons I love doing this work is that buildings are kind of where everything comes together, right? Whether we're addressing issues around energy, waste, water, occupant health, it all comes home in a building somewhere. And so it gives us the opportunity to really create impacts that can affect a lot of other pieces of the puzzle.
And that's true. I mean, most of our emissions or pollution comes from the built environment, and most people don't realize that. So what are some things people like the average person could do to maybe make their own home a little bit green if it's an existing building, like retrofitting, since it's not going to be new construction? What are the little tips and tricks they could do to help?
Yeah, and it's kind of like anything, right? The more you focus, the more it expands. That small, tiny home project you were going to do, it suddenly becomes 3 years of your life that you're working on. But it starts very simple. If you think about your home, think about the things that you're spending money on at the end of the day. It's your heating and your cooling, it's your lighting. And so it's important for us to really start with the basics, which is making sure we have a tight envelope for our for our environment that we live in. Meaning, is it sealed, right? Are the windows sealed? Is there insulation? Are there cracks where air is escaping? Because if we're spending money and energy heating or cooling air that's just going to leak out of the house, I'm constantly telling my kids to close the doors, and I'm like, we can't cool off the rest of the world with our air conditioning.
My dad did that too.
It's just important to start there, and then start to layer on top of that, right? So, okay, you've addressed your envelope, evaluating things like, are you using efficient lighting? Do you have lights on timers and things like that to make sure they're turning off? Have you looked at solar, for your home and looked at the options for that? Water is a major issue of focus for us right now, and there's a lot you can do to reduce your water use, drip irrigation, native plants. I think a lot of it's just being aware and being intentional of where these resources are going. And I think one of the things that has impacted all of us over the last few years is just the impacts of the pandemic. And, hopefully we're all more aware of the environments we're in now than we were a few years ago, especially at home where we're spending time here in different ways than we ever thought we were. So.
Do you see more incentivized stuff as far as, people trying to green their older homes, whether it's air conditioning units, heating units? Do you see any sort of incentives to help people? I think everybody's kind of coming out of the pandemic, and that's the last thing on their mind is greening their home, right? They're trying to get back into a work environment or figure out what they're going to do next with their life. The last thing they want to do is really try to green up something that
Yes,
either
from the money.
they're not responsible for, if they're a tenant, or what have you.
Are you saying I'm the only one who's thinking about how to green my home all the time? Is that
Right? Exactly. You know, with everything else going on.
It's expensive. It's a cost.
No, it's well, and it's kind of daunting. I mean, I think that so first of all, there are a lot of incentives, and we can kind of dive into where those sit. There are incentives around modernizing your air conditioning. There are direct install programs to help with lighting, but I think one of the big things that the utility companies need to deal with is that it feels like you need to get a PhD in order to fill out a rebate application and see that through. Like, I do this work all the time, and even me going through the rebate process, it can be kind of overwhelming. It takes a considerable investment of time. So I think we need to really think about how we streamline that process, especially to create equity of access for everyone to be able to get the benefits of that. One of the main buzzwords I'm sure you've maybe heard a little bit or starting to hear more of is really around heat pumps. It's one of those things that the federal government's talking about now. Everyone's it's all about heat pumps, and that's really just a much more efficient way of heating or cooling our buildings. Removes the need for natural gas, which creates emissions and is one of the main sources, and if not the main source of emissions in our homes now. And so there's a lot of incentives, coming down the pipeline for heat pumps specifically, because if you look at where we're at on kind of the curve of needing to reduce emissions from our homes, the biggest thing we can do that's going to get us the gains we need to get in the next 10 years in this fight against climate change is to really take natural gas, out of our homes, and that natural gas comes in the form of heating, cooking. It's our dryers. It's the things that are using that in our homes, and we need to find ways to electrify that as the grid gets more renewable. And that's a key piece. We have to continue to push the grid to get more renewable in order for that to be a
we have to take little steps.
Well, it's not even getting it renewable, it's getting it sustainable. I mean, we got this huge push to go to electric cars here in California, but then over the summer, as things are getting hot, we're told, hold up, don't charge it. So it's just like, and we've talked about this numerous times on the show before. It's like you pay your electric bills, but then that goes into somebody's pocket. Then we got fires started because the lines don't even get me going on this whole thing. It freaking annoys me. But I think that's, you talk about the incentives for people, and it's like, I think they're great that they're there. How do you find things? It's like people didn't even know about it. So it's like, I know you've got like PACE and all these different kind of loans. Don't get me started on those things. But just to try to find the governmental rebates, you don't even know what's available. It's like, say you want to get a new AC. Yes, you need to, because the coolant has changed to what has to be used for the Freon. People aren't even aware of these things, and then the expense behind doing them, even if there is a rebate, it's not enough to get people to be able to do it and still put food on their table. So I think that's the hardest part going forward, in my opinion. Well, one of.
Joel, I nominate you to start, instead of an Angie's list, a Joel's list of different rebates and incentives, and people can just type in and
there really does need to be something like that, because if people want to do something, they have no idea that some of these rebates are out there. Unfortunately, there's often not enough money in the programs for everybody who wants to do it, and we see that a lot. But I won't get on that subject. So let's talk about when you're talking about doing renovations and everything like that. Hello. What happens?
Everyone's okay. Hopefully everyone's okay. Yeah.
So as the materials are being changed out, like say you're changing over from regular light, from incandescent lights to LED, you're swapping out your AC units, you're changing, you're doing all this kind of stuff. What about you go solar, so let's talk about lifespans and what happens to these materials that you've either taken out of your home, or that, if you're going solar, it's only got like a, X amount of lifespan on it before the panels are bad. How are you addressing that for the future, as opposed to just the immediate needs now?
No, that's a really excellent question. And one of the things I do want to point to is we've tried to develop some tools that we've made available digitally on our website over the past couple of years to really help people navigate some of this. So we do have a personal emissions calculator you can use, and it'll help you create a plan for 1 year, 3 year, 5, 10 years, and let you look at, okay, if I only have so much money, if I make an investment this year, what does that get me? If I plan for an investment in 3 years, what does that get me? So we run an accelerator for startups that's now in its 4th year, and we've had about 70 startups in that program with us over that time frame. And so we actually white labeled one of these companies' tools to do that. And then there's another company I just want to mention because you're talking about rebates that we're working with called 𝑦𝒍𝒑𝒔, which actually has a plugin for online shopping carts that immediately connects with rebates. So I think some of this stuff is happening because we need to see the investment. We need to see the connection with people to meet them where they're at. And I think education is so key. I'm a big believer that once people learn things, they don't unlearn them. And I think part of the challenge is that, we're being forced and pushed to make decisions without the education, without the knowledge and the awareness to kind of back that up. And so that doesn't put us in a place where we can, feel like we're part of the process, understand the role we play, understand the control we have. And so that's one of the things we're trying to address. We launched a program last year called our Green Affordable Housing Program. And we actually have created tenant education in English and Spanish for tenants. So we're primarily focused on multifamily, so apartment buildings and low-income communities, doing education with the tenants. And then we've got a tool to engage owners and managers where we can help them figure out pathways to reduce the emissions of their building, make their buildings more efficient. But I think that's the part that's been missing is this like holistic approach. We're also adding, in that program, we're offering EV chargers, we're offering heat pumps, we're offering other stuff that we're really installing. But up until now, I feel like so many things have just been one-off. And then, as somebody who owns a home or owns a building with your tenants, you're getting calls from contractors. You don't know who to trust. You know what they're selling you. Oh, they're telling you you're going to get a rebate afterwards. So the system is a bit broken. And I think we need to kind of really look at that process. And what's the experience of the average person, the customer, right? It's a journey. How do we support people on that journey?
I think you actually made an incredibly strong point is that we talk a lot about the lofty goals about we're going to get here, but there's no talk of, okay, these are the steps we're going to need to go to do it. It's just kind of like everybody go solar. Okay, hold up. What does that mean? How are we going to pay for the roof repairs that are going to happen? How are we going to get the panel? So it's there's this great dream out there, but there's no explanation on how it came to fruition, how to get there, and how to implement it. So I think that's kind of huge. I do have a quick question for you, though. And I told Wendy I was going to ask about this one.
Yeah.
3D printed homes, thoughts, and prefab homes, like alternative architecture.
I first of all, I've had the opportunity to work with more than a couple companies in this space. And the thing that's crazy about construction in many ways is very little has changed in 150 years of building things. And so there's so much waste that comes from construction sites. It's waste from materials that are on site. If you think about we're transporting materials to a site that get wasted, that's additional emissions and waste in the value chain. And so the opportunity with prefabricated homes, with 3D printing, is for us to really focus on minimizing the amount of materials that goes into that and really be targeted and reduce the amount of embodied carbon that it goes to build those homes. And really, be able to hopefully speed up the process and rethink how we do construction. So I'm a big believer in these types of solutions. I think we got to have a mixed portfolio of stuff, right? There's some people who are going to keep building things the same way. There's got to be options for them, but I think we have the opportunity to dramatically reduce construction costs by reducing the amount of materials that goes into it up front, and then by optimizing that labor in a manufacturing facility in a place where you can really gets that, the old school Ford kind of mindset of how do we, plug everything in, will help us reduce costs. Because, you look at the costs for even building subsidized affordable housing in LA, it's absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, we've all approved incentives, approved tax increases over the last decade. And, when you look at the cost per door, and I don't want to misspeak the number, but it's, I think it's $400 to $500 a square foot sometimes.
It's huge.
To build, one unit of housing, and that's absolutely mind-boggling. We can't exist that way. It's not going to help us solve our problem. So I think technology solutions like that can be helpful. And is it okay, Joel, if I go back to a point you made earlier, just around materials and this is one of the things that I think has really blown me away. And I know I'm a green building nerd, so I'm probably the only person who's blown away by this. But there's always kind of been a little bit of talk around materials and embodied carbon.
Mm-hmm.
Really 3-4 years ago, that started to really kind of increase. There's this thing called EPDs, which are environmental product declarations. So essentially kind of like a nutrition label for products that manufacturers have to supply now. And I've just been amazed at how quickly a lot of this has been mainstreamed in the last few years, where it's starting to be specified into designs, into products. I think us thinking about our materials and where they come from is a profound moment to rethink about how do we locally source, more materials for building. How do we rethink how we use wood, the original building material, right? That can really help reduce.
So kind of like a new version of farm to table, only farm to house.
It's funny, the similarities, I think, across everything. It's funny you say that, because I think that's very, like, we spent all this time as American society trying to get to scale, right? To centralize things and build these big systems. And then I feel like we're at this point now, we're realizing, no, the answer is actually more in distributed community solutions. And food is one part of that. So is energy. I think we're going to see a movement around water to the same sort of thing. And even health, right? Like, we're realizing that, no, we need localized solutions that can really meet us where we're at, and those will be less expensive. Those will be more tailored to my real needs and what my community needs. And there'll be more of a human element in it that we've been missing, right?
So when it comes to, like, we're talking about like different types of architecture, whether people are using prefabs, which I'm a huge fan of. I'm a massive fan of those. 3D printing, I know they just did, like, I think one of the first 2-story 3D printed homes in Texas. I think one of the biggest issues is, and I saw this a lot in the greater LA area, is the zoning. Because you've got this technology out there, you have the alternative ways which are more affordable for people, sort of. Let me just preface it by saying that's in quotes, italic and bold.
Affordable is relative.
Exactly.
Yes.
But you still got to buy the land and all this and do the infrastructure, but whatever. It's the zoning. Like, how do you foresee cities are going to become more open to these alternative ways to do housing?
I think we have to. I look at how quickly the pandemic has impacted how we use, office space as an example. And I think the other shoe has yet to drop in the office building community. When I talk to people who do work in that space, or investors or owners, there's a lot of, I think, bullishness that, everything's just going to go back to the way it was. And I think the reality is how people work has changed. Offices won't go away, but the footprint will change and how they're used will change. And that will open up opportunities to repurpose those buildings for housing and for other uses.
Absolutely.
And from an environmental standpoint, the best thing we can do is reuse something that already exists. And so I think they're going to have to look at that kind of zoning and changes. And you think about our work patterns too, right? Now people are, we're seeing a movement out now more to the suburbs and more to places where people can have more space. How does that impact how we use our urban core? I've worked in downtown LA now for, I feel like I'm starting to get old now. How long has it been? It's been like 15 years. And, I just remember all that optimism, and we were building something so special in downtown. And it took us so long to get there. And then the pandemic hit, and we've completely fallen off this cliff. And I don't need to dive into all the major issues we need to address, but how do we re-envision? I haven't heard yet a vision of what does the future of these urban cores look like? That's really compelling, because I don't think we know the answer yet.
Yeah. May I offer a suggestion? Because you just triggered a memory that I had. My sister lived in Switzerland for about 20 years. And I always noticed that the buildings were occupied, the big industrial looking buildings, because some of them were built in the 60s, not the best looking architecture. But people were there 24 hours a day. I'm like, well, what's going on? And she said, there's a zoning law where every other floor is residential, commercial, or office space, residential office space. So during the day, offices, at night, people are home. And so there's always occupancy. There's always activity going on. It's never empty. It's never a ghost town. And it made a lot of sense. I mean, it was a really efficient way to use a building. And if you had every other floor, then there was quiet between floors. You didn't have noisy neighbors stomping around. That might be something to think about.
I think in California, they're working on changing zoning now for commercial buildings that are vacant, which is getting a lot of pushback because of the tax dollars, whatever. But it just makes sense. We need places that are convenient for people. And usually these commercial buildings that are sitting there vacant are the most convenient for people to have live, work. Whether you look at some sections where even if you just have commercial on the bottom, kind of like in New York or any major metropolitan area, you have a whole commercial portion that's on the bottom, and then people live up above. And so you create this sense of community that way. kind of like the way it was always done before we had urban sprawl and suburbs. But
True.
whatever. So, I mean, it's like, it's interesting to see that, there's a lot of want to do these things and the need to do it, but the pushback is mind-boggling because, well, it always comes down to the dollar. It just
does.
everything does.
Well, it's also part of the flavor of our society, right? We've built this system that is sort of meant to slow down change and provide as many opportunities as possible. And that's part of our challenge here, right? Is we have to come up with solutions that are going to be able to navigate this complicated course of all these different things to make it work. One thing I wanted to kind of hit on, just to kind of get out there for a moment, because we're talking about repurposing buildings. I met with a delegation, maybe 3 years ago. It was pre-pandemic, so probably 3-4 years ago, from the Netherlands, and they were working on a project where they were actually doing an inventory of all the materials in their buildings in their city, and looking at it more as a bank and a store of materials. So the steel, the glass, the special materials in the wiring, actually looking at that as this is a store of materials that we can repurpose and use in different ways. And I thought that was a profound way to kind of look at everything we've invested already, right? We're talking about repurposing buildings. Well, actually, it's more like, no, we already invested in all the stuff that's there. How to reuse it in a way where we can get more value out of it. I thought that was a really interesting
That's
approach.
great.
Yeah. Way to look at it.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that drives me crazy is when I see buildings getting torn down and demolished for something new or repurposed, everything goes in a dumpster and gets hauled away and thrown in a landfill.
Oh.
And I turn into like this little hoarder where I want to jump in and start salvaging things, but I can't.
we actually, about 2.5 years ago, we put out a public call around construction waste to raise awareness around the problem. It's a huge issue. Most of the waste that comes out of construction goes straight to landfill. There's even the systems that are supposed to be in place to make sure that it gets diverted to different uses are mostly rubber stamp sort of pieces right now. And it's a really big challenge. And a lot of stuff has toxic materials in it. There's a great company that we've worked with that actually does about 50% of the demolition here in office spaces now, called IRS. They have a great facility if you ever want to do a tour. And I just use this as an example because I think it's really profound. So they've been trying to find ways to divert some of these materials. So I'll use drywall as an example. Most of that stuff goes into landfill. They worked for 4 years to set up a contract with an almond grower in the Central Valley to take the gypsum from drywall and use it as fertilizer. But it took them 4 years to set that up and get that process in place so they could have a partner who could take that gypsum. And they're also one of the only companies in the country that really recycles acoustic tiles, that you see all those acoustic tiles in all those old buildings.
Yeah.
And it shows you how much work needs to be done in the system, because the system does not incentivize those. And they do that because that's part of their business model, because they care. They're doing the LEED certified buildings they're doing the demo waste for. And that's the kind of thinking and intentionality we need to get into the system, right?
Well, I mean, just have an organization like whether it's Habitat for Humanity or some other organization that's actually building something for somebody else, come in and take these materials that are salvageable so they can then use them on the next project. Like,
Good point.
Just little details like that. And maybe you get a tax break because it's a donation.
Well, you're asking people to think outside the box and think differently. It's hard.
When it adds an extra step and it adds more work and time. That's the problem. And time is
money. Time is money. It's all money. Unfortunately, that's how our
always is.
Works.
We say that constantly on the show. If it's not making money or saving money, people don't care.
Well, I'm an econ major from undergrad, so I think part of the thing that I think is interesting too is, and I've been saying this about the real estate world, is really that the financial model that we use to calculate returns is really flawed. That's the problem. We build our system and our society on these assumptions.
Yeah.
And then you go back and you're like, well, wait a minute, we're using this model on returns for buildings. Well, is that taking into account occupant health? Is that taking into account a higher number of heat days? Is that taking into account building systems that aren't going to last as long, or issues from smoke or rising water costs? And the reality is it's not. And so we have these people who are building buildings, flipping them, and all of that's based on this financial model that's flawed. So how do we rethink that value a little bit? And I think it's starting to happen in the work world. People are seeing that, wait a minute, if I'm in a healthier space to work, I'm going to be more productive. I'm going to have less sick days. Yep. The value of my time is probably worth more than the difference I would have paid to have a cheaper space that wouldn't be as healthy for me. And so things are starting to change a little bit, but I think that's where we need to push, is to say, hey, look, the smart people who are going to make money in the future, and this is kind of what's happening in the ESG movement and the corporate side, it's how you shifting your business model to take into account these impacts from climate change, from health, from all these things that impact people, because that's a smarter mousetrap that's going to make you more money longer term.
Brilliant. Talk to the ESG folks. Get it done.
I'm trying one day at a time. That's why I'm here. Wait a minute.
That's why you're here. No, hopefully someone will think about that and hear it and be like, oh, it's a damn good idea. But since we are running onto our 30-minute mark, can we talk about your Green Gala?
Sure. It's actually our 18th year of hosting this gala. So this is our biggest fundraiser event of the year. It's a lot of fun. We typically have about 450 people. One of the things I'm proud of, look, I grew up here in LA. I could do a lot of different things. I love doing this work because I can create an impact in the community I grew up in. But we take our work very seriously, but we also want to make sure we have a good time doing it. And I will say, we throw a damn good party here at USGBC-LA. And so our gala is an example of that. Last year we did a Union Station. This year we're doing it in Hollywood. We're having kind of a Hollywood throwback theme. We do community awards for people who've made impact locally. We have an Environmental Justice Award. We have a Heart of Our Community Award. We do awards for buildings that are leading in the region. So I hope folks can come out. We just had our mini golf tournament a few weeks ago, which is a fundraiser for our legacy project. So every year we put $20,000 in the community project, and our members and volunteers come out and really help design it, help build it. This year it's a beautiful project. It's a garden in Watts for survivors of violence. To come it's a place of peace and a place of being able to connect with each other. And so how do we raise money for it? We literally have a mini golf tournament in our parking lot of our building. There's tacos, there's beers, there's music, and that's how we do it. And that's kind of one of the things I love about our culture as a community is, hey, we can just throw down in a parking lot and raise
you got
money.
Me at tacos and beer. Well, on that, so guys, please check out the United States Green Building Council in Los Angeles. And you were at the Lacey Center, correct?
Yeah, the La Cretz Innovation Campus is where we're located. Yeah, and I worked on that project for many years, so it's nice.
Yeah, you were part of that whole launching. So that's in downtown LA in the Arts District. It's a beautiful building. I've been there many times. It is an homage to green building. And so on that, guys, I thank you so much. Ben, thank you so much for all of the wisdom you've given us on green building and why that's so important for people to know about. And, I'm Wendy Nystrom, your host for Environmental Social Justice, with my co-hosts who are both with me today. I'm very excited. Joel Vendette, Joy Langford, Vote for Joy, Water Replenishment District Division #1. And we will talk to you guys next time. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for the time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.